PL-15 is not a missile that announces itself. There is no visual, no smoke trail visible from the cockpit of a patrol aircraft at 24,000 feet over the Taiwan Strait. There is no warning from the aircraft's self-defense suite until the missile's own active seeker activates at terminal phase, typically inside 30 kilometers, typically too late for a non-maneuvering patrol airframe to execute any meaningful response. The PL-15 leaves its rail at Mach 4.0 and accelerates. Estimated engagement range against large non-maneuvering targets, over 200 kilometers. By the time a P-8A crew hears the tone that tells them a missile seeker has locked their aircraft, the geometry is already settled. The only question at that point is whether someone else did the math first and acted on it sooner. At 9:44 a.m., someone did. The Taiwan Strait on this morning was overcast below 15,000 feet, with cumulus building over the western shore where warm mainland air pushed east and met the cooler marine layer. Above the weather, the sky was clear and hard blue from 20,000 feet to the visible edge of atmosphere. The P-8A Poseidon, operating as Spectre 1, was at 24,000 feet on a standard maritime patrol track, collecting acoustic and electronic intelligence across the strait since the early morning watch change. 9 crew members. Standard mission profile. International airspace, 112 nautical miles from the nearest point of the Chinese coastline. The PLAAF J-16 that had been tracking Spectre 1 for the past 31 minutes was not in international airspace. It had crossed the median line at 9:12 a.m. and had been holding at 68 kilometers northeast of Spectre 1 at 31,000 feet, its KLJ-7 radar in a narrow sector scan that the P-8's self-defense suite had been registering as fire control illumination for 11 of those 31 minutes. The rules of engagement had been updated twice in the past 90 days, specifically to address this scenario. At 9:43 a.m. and 51 seconds, the J-16 released. The PL-15's launch signature appeared on the E-2D Hawkeye's sensors as a discrete infrared event at bearing 287, altitude 31,000 feet. A spike in the IR overlay that lasted 0.8 seconds and resolved into a tracking solution within 1.4 seconds of detection. The Hawkeye's tactical controller had the launch characterized before the missile had traveled 2 kilometers from the rail. Active radar seeker estimated Mach 4.0 bearing towards Spectre 1. Time to terminal phase activation against Spectre 1 estimated 4 minutes, 20 seconds. The tactical controller transmitted on 2 frequencies simultaneously. One to Spectre 1, initiating the crew's defensive egress protocol. 1 to the ready cap. At 9:44 a.m. the catapult fired, 0 to 165 knots in 2.3 seconds. The pilot had been at Alert 5 for 90 minutes, 5 minutes from launch to wheels up, seated in the cockpit of an F-35C on the bow catapult of USS Carl Vinson with the mission brief already processed, the aircraft already aligned, every system already in the state it needed to be in. Alert 5 means you are already there. The catapult launch did not feel like readiness being activated. It felt like a compression event applied to a system that had been waiting at maximum tension for an hour and a half. The launch bar released, 43,000 pounds of thrust came online, and the South China Sea appeared below through a gray haze as the aircraft climbed through 300 feet, gear coming up, nose rotating toward bearing 287.
The HMD showed the tactical picture before the gear was fully retracted. Spectre 1 bearing 287 at 68 nautical miles. The PL-15 track, designated Hostile 1 on the Link 16 picture, bearing 287 at 61 nautical miles. Altitude 28,500 feet, speed 2,850 knots and increasing. The J-16, now designated Bogey 1, bearing 291 at 72 nautical miles, altitude 31,000 feet, holding position after the release. Not aggressing, holding.
That detail would matter later. The problem was geometric and urgent, and unlike any intercept the pilot had trained for in simulation. Intercepting an aircraft requires meeting geometry, getting ahead of a target's track where a missile seeker can acquire and guide. Intercepting a missile with a missile requires the same principle applied to a target at Mach 4.0 that is maneuvering in terminal phase and designed to make that geometry as difficult as possible. The AIM-120D has a classified performance envelope against high-speed targets. What that envelope does not fully capture is the window, the narrow band of geometry and closing rate within which the intercept is possible before the PL-15 reaches Spectre 1. At 9:44 a.m. and 30 seconds, with the F-35C climbing through 8,000 feet, the Hawkeye's controller provided the updated intercept geometry. The window was 3 minutes and 40 seconds. At current closure, the F-35C would reach intercept geometry on Hostel 1, a point in space where an AIM-120D could acquire the missile's radar cross-section and track to intercept at 9:47 a.m. and 50 seconds. Spectre 1 would come within the PL-15's terminal seeker activation range at 9:49 a.m. and 11 seconds. The margin between intercept possible and intercept too late, 81 seconds. 81 seconds was the entire budget. The AN/APG-81 radar came online at full power at 9:44 a.m. and 45 seconds. No LPI, no passive approach, no electronic discretion. This was not the intercept geometry where concealment mattered. What mattered was acquisition range and acquisition speed. The APG-81 in air-to-air track mode against a target with the radar cross-section of an inbound missile, a technical challenge that the system had been designed to meet, but that no one in the chain of command had wanted to discover the answer to operationally. Hostel 1 appeared on the radar display at 9:44 a.m. and 52 seconds. Range 54 nautical miles, altitude 26,200 feet. Speed 2,940 knots. The return was small. A missile's frontal cross-section is orders of magnitude smaller than an aircraft's, but it was coherent and it was tracked, and the fire control solution began building immediately. The geometry was difficult. The PL-15 was not approaching the F-35C. It was moving on a vector that crossed the F-35C's intercept course at an angle, not a head-on intercept. An angular approach against a target covering 1.5 kilometers per second. At 9:45 a.m., the J-16 turned. The KLJ-7A radar shifted from its post-release holding scan to a forward sector scan pointed at bearing 113, directly toward the F-35C. The J-16 pilot was not aggressing. He was providing terminal guidance support to the PL-15, maintaining the data link that allowed the missile seeker to receive mid-course updates from the launching platform. He was also, in the same act, illuminating the F-35C with a fire control radar from 71 nautical miles. Two problems simultaneously, one solution to each. The RWR in the helmet registered the J-16's KLJ-7A lock tone at 9:45 a.m. and 8 seconds, a high-frequency warble identified in 0.3 seconds as PLAAF J-16 fire control mode. Spike! Spike! Bandit 2901 high! Not a search sweep, a lock. The J-16 pilot was tracking the F-35C while his missile tracked Spectre 1. Two engagement geometries managed simultaneously from 31,000 feet with professional precision. This was the adversary's competence moment. A clean release at 68 kilometers against a non-maneuvering target, followed immediately by repositioning to provide terminal guidance uplink, followed by forward radar illumination of the responding interceptor. 3 tactical actions in under 90 seconds, each the correct choice in sequence, executed without hesitation by a crew that had clearly briefed this scenario. The pilot processed the RWR tone and did not deviate from the intercept vector. Hostel 1 was the priority. Bogey 1 at 71 nautical miles with a fire control radar lock was a concern, a significant one, but it was not the 81-second problem. The AIM-120D in the left bay was not for the missile. The AIM-120D in the right bay was not currently for the J-16. The geometry would determine sequence.
Range to hostile 1, 48 nautical miles, speed 3,010 knots. The fire control solution confidence level, 67%. The APG-81 was tracking a target smaller than anything in the standard engagement database, using a radar cross-section return that the system's algorithms had been adapted but not originally designed for. The confidence threshold for AIM-120D release against an airborne missile was not the same as against an aircraft. The threshold for this scenario, with this geometry, with this margin of 81 seconds, a judgment call that the rules of engagement placed explicitly in the cockpit.
At 9:45 a.m. and 41 seconds, the first friction event arrived. The AN/APG-81 lost coherent track on hostile 1 for 6 seconds. Not jamming, the J-16's electronic warfare systems were not engaged against the intercepting F-35C's radar, presumably because the J-16's priority at this moment was maintaining the PL-15 data link uplink, and jamming the F-35C's radar would have required redirecting EW resources from that task. The loss was atmospheric. A layer of temperature inversion at 22,000 feet over the strait was creating a multipath environment that scattered the APG-81's return from the small missile cross-section into noise. 6 seconds. The track line on the HMD went from solid to dashed.
6 seconds at 3,010 knots is 9.2 kilometers of missile travel.
The pilot held the intercept vector using the last confirmed track position and the Hawkeye's Link 16 data link feed, which was maintaining its own track on hostile 1 through a different sensor geometry. The Link 16 track was less precise than the APG-81 fire control solution, good enough for situational awareness, not good enough alone for weapons release. At 9:45 a.m. and 47 seconds, the APG-81 reacquired coherent track. Confidence, 71%, climbing. Range to hostile 1, 39 nautical miles, speed 3,050 knots, altitude 24,800 feet. The missile had descended 1,400 feet in the past 45 seconds, terminal phase dive beginning to develop as it tracked towards Spectre 1's altitude. The intercept window was compressing from both directions, the F-35C closing, the missile descending and accelerating toward its terminal geometry. Spectre 1, Hawkeye. Hostile 1 range 31 miles, closing. Maintain best egress rate. Keep your nose pointed south. The P-8A aircraft commander's acknowledgement came back controlled and precise. 9 crew members executing a defensive egress in an aircraft with a maximum speed of 490 knots against a missile traveling at over 3,000. The physics were not in their favor. They were doing the only things available, maximizing distance, deploying electronic countermeasures with uncertain utility against the PL-15's seeker architecture, and maintaining the discipline of a professional crew in a scenario training had briefed but could not fully replicate. At 9:46 a.m., range to hostile 1, 31 nautical miles. Fire control confidence, 79%. The solution was building, but the geometry was changing faster than the confidence was climbing. The AIM-120D needed release at a range that gave its seeker time to acquire the inbound missile before the intercept geometry closed. The optimal release point, 9:46 a.m. and 22 seconds. At 9:46 a.m. and 19 seconds, the J-16 released a second PL-15. The IR signature on the Hawkeye's feed was unambiguous. A second launch event from Bogey 1, same bearing, same altitude, this time on a vector that the tactical controller characterized in under 2 seconds. Not aimed at Spectre 1, aimed at the F-35C. Hostile 2, Range 71 nautical miles from the F-35C, speed building from 0, intercept geometry developing. The PL-15 at Mach 4.0 from 71 nautical miles, time to intercept geometry against the F-35C, estimated 2 minutes and 58 seconds. The budget had just changed. The 81 seconds allocated to intercepting Hostile 1 were now also the first 2 minutes and 58 seconds of a second geometry problem that could not be ignored. The pilot released on Hostile 1 at 9:46 a.m. and 22 seconds.
Fox 3, AIM-120D from the left internal bay. Active radar seeker, downlink active, the missile acquiring its own track within 1.8 seconds of separation. The HMD showed the weapon's track symbol, diverging from the F-35C's position marker and converging toward the Hostile 1 track line at a closure rate that the geometry predicted would produce intercept in 44 seconds. The cost of that 44 seconds, $1.1 million on a single fire control solution against a target that had never been engaged this way before in operational conditions. The cost of not pressing the release, 9 crew members, and a $250 million aircraft at the end of a geometry that was already inside 2 minutes to terminal. The AIM-120D flew true at 9:47 a.m. and 6 seconds. The AIM-120D's seeker went active at the pre-calculated acquisition range and locked Hostile 1's radar cross-section. The track symbol on the HMD went from predictive to confirmed. The missile had its target. The pilot watched the symbol converge and noted the fuel state, bingo plus 19, climbing toward bingo plus 16 as the afterburner burned through reserves that the intercept geometry had demanded, and turned his attention fully to Hostile 2. Hostile 2, bearing 291, range 58 nautical miles, speed 2,200 knots, and climbing fast. Time to intercept geometry against the F-35C, 1 minute and 51 seconds remaining. The J-16 was still providing terminal guidance uplink. KLJ-7A still in lock mode on the F-35C. The crew managing both the uplink and the forward radar illuminations simultaneously with a precision that the debrief would later note as indicating a high-experience crew operating within a well-rehearsed multi-launch protocol. The Kinetic event on Hostile 1 occurred at 9:47 a.m. and 12 seconds. The AIM-120D closed the final geometry in the terminal phase, and the intercept produced a detonation signature on the Hawkeye's IR feed. A brief, hard flash at 23,100 feet, bearing 287, followed by the radar track on Hostile 1 going from solid to absent. The PL-15 that had been traveling at 3,050 knots toward 9 crew members ceased to exist as a coherent aerodynamic object. The debris field dispersed on its ballistic trajectory, below and ahead of Spectre 1's current position, clearing the P-8A's track by 4.1 nautical miles. The tactical controller transmitted, "Spectre 1, Hawkeye. Hostile 1 neutralized. Continue egress. Hostile 2 bearing 291, range 48 miles, tracking Viper 1. 9 crew members on a P-8A heard that transmission and understood exactly what it meant. The geometry was no longer aimed at them.
The second problem was now entirely the F-35C's problem. Hostile 2 at 48 nautical miles, speed 2,800 knots. The AIM-120D in the right internal bay, $1.1 million, seeker chilled, solution building. The intercept geometry against an inbound missile that knows where you are is a different calculation than the geometry against Hostile 1. The closure rate between the F-35C and an inbound PL-15 is additive. The F-35C's own speed of Mach 1.3 added to the missile's Mach 4.0 creates a combined closing rate that compresses the intercept window to seconds.
At 9:47 a.m. and 30 seconds, the second friction event,
The RWR tone shifted from the steady KLJ-7A track mode to a different, higher frequency signal that the threat library took 0.9 seconds to characterize: PL-15 active seeker activation. Hostile 2 had gone active at 44 nautical miles. Earlier than doctrine predicted, the J-16 crew had commanded early seeker activation, either because they assessed the F-35C's defensive maneuvering required it, or because they had assessed the first intercept and were adapting their terminal guidance timing for the second round. Early seeker activation meant the pilot's own maneuvering options had just narrowed. A PL-15 with an active seeker tracks maneuvering targets. The F-35C's electronic warfare suite, the AN/ASQ-239, engaged automatically, frequency hopping jamming signal, false return generation, attempting to seduce the PL-15 seeker off the true return. The seeker was the PL-15's most capable component. Whether the jamming would degrade its track to a degree that mattered would be known in approximately 60 seconds.
The pilot turned. Not away from Hostile 2, that geometry was already closed. Into a notch, a turn that placed the F-35C's velocity vector perpendicular to Hostile 2's approach. Bearing, exploiting the Doppler notch filter that even modern missile seekers carry as a legacy of their radar heritage. At exactly 90 degrees to the missile's approach vector, a Doppler-dependent seeker sees the intercepted aircraft's radar return collapse towards zero velocity, indistinguishable from ground clutter. The notch maneuver, the oldest trick in BVR defense, still relevant because physics does not change with the missile generation. The G-load in the notch turn, 6.2 G, sustained for 4 seconds. At 6.2 G, the pilot's effective body weight was 496 kilograms. The anti-G suit pressurized to maximum. Peripheral vision narrowed at the edges, the tunnel effect that arrives at 6G and becomes acute at 7G. The AGSM, clenching every muscle below the chest, sharp controlled breaths against resistance, engaged without conscious direction. It is exhausting in the way that sprinting is exhausting, briefly sustainable, cumulatively costly. The HMD showed Hostile 2's track shifting during the notch. The symbol's convergence vector changed, the seeker appearing to lose precise track for 1.8 seconds before reacquiring. The AN/ASQ-239 jamming, and the notch had combined to produce a 1.8-second track break. Not enough to defeat the intercept. Enough to change the geometry by 2.4 nautical miles. At 9:47 a.m. and 51 seconds, range to Hostile 2, 28 nautical miles, closing at a combined rate that left 21 seconds to the intercept window. The pilot pulled out of the notch, nose coming back onto a bearing that placed Hostile 2 in the forward hemisphere, the APG-81 locking the inbound missile's seeker head in 1.1 seconds. The return was stronger now. The PL-15's own active seeker was radiating, giving the APG-81 an additional emission source to track alongside the missile's physical cross-section. Fire control solution confidence, 84%, the highest it had been against either missile. The pilot noted one thing before pressing the release. The J-16 at 71 nautical miles was now turning, finally egressing. The KLJ-7A lock tone dropped from the steady tracking warble to an intermittent search sweep, then went silent. The crew had seen the first intercept on their own sensors and had made the decision that the second launch's data link uplink was no longer worth maintaining from this geometry. The J-16's competence had its limit. 2 professional decisions ended this engagement: releasing the second PL-15 early enough to create a layered geometry problem, and egressing when the first intercept demonstrated the responding capability. Both were correct tactical decisions. The second one arrived too late to matter for Hostile 2. Fox 3. AIM-120D from the right internal bay at 9:47 a.m. and 58 seconds. The seeker acquired Hostile 2's active emission in 1.4 seconds. The convergence geometry on the HMD, 19 seconds.
The Kinetic event occurred at 9:48 a.m. and 17 seconds. A second detonation signature on the Hawkeye's IR feed at 22,400 feet, bearing 289, debris field on a ballistic trajectory that crossed 6.8 nautical miles clear of the F-35C's current position. Hostile 2's radar track, absent. Both inbound missiles neutralized. The F-35C had been airborne for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The pilot leveled at 26,000 feet and held a southward heading. The HMD showed the tactical picture. Spectre 1 continuing egress, now 84 nautical miles south and increasing distance. Bogey 1 bearing 291 at 69 nautical miles, egressing northwest at Mach 1.1. KLJ-7A in standby, no emissions. The strait ahead, empty radar picture. The cloud deck below undisturbed. The physical world visible from the cockpit. Hard blue sky, white overcast below. The faint brown smudge of the Chinese coast 30 degrees to the left at the edge of visibility. In the helmet, breathing. The oxygen masks hiss with each inhale, the slight resistance of the demand regulator, the sound of the pilot's own respiration audible in the sealed environment the way it is always audible after a high G sequence. Slightly ragged, slightly fast, the body accounting for the debt of 4 minutes of sustained physiological demand. Heart rate, 161. The physiological monitoring systems display in the corner of the HMD a number that told the story of the last 4 minutes more accurately than any verbal debrief would. The fuel state told a different story. Bingo +4. The intercept geometry had required afterburner from catapult to release, a fuel burn rate that the 4-minute mission had consumed with the efficiency of a system designed for sustained operations, not sprint intercepts. Bingo +4. 4 minutes above minimum safe recovery fuel. The approach to the ship had to begin now. The total cost of the past 4 minutes and 17 seconds. 2 AIM-120D rounds at $1.1 million each, $2.2 million in ordnance. The F-35C's operating cost for 4 minutes, approximately $860. The P-8A on station for the mission hour before the launch, $22,000. Total U.S. expenditure from first radar contact to final intercept, $25,060. The 2 PL-15s the PLAAF released, approximately $2 million each at conservative estimates, $4 million total. 2 missiles that achieved nothing except providing the most operationally relevant live fire test of AIM-120D performance against PL-15 class targets that U.S. aviation had ever recorded. That number would be discussed at levels well above the tactical debrief. The recovery at 10:09 a.m. was executed with the controlled urgency that a bingo-adjacent fuel state requires, a straight-in approach rather than the standard overhead brake. The meatball acquired at 5 miles. The glide slope held through the mild turbulence below the cloud deck, the 3-wire at 141 knots. The arrested landing deceleration at 4G, familiar, finite, the definitive physical signal that the sortie had ended. The canopy came up. The South China Sea air, humid and salt-heavy, replaced the pressurized atmosphere of the cockpit. The pilot sat still for 3 seconds. 2 missiles had been in the air simultaneously. 1 aimed at 9 people. 1 aimed at the cockpit. The order in which they had to be solved was imposed by geometry. Hostile 1 first, because its timeline was shorter. Hostile 2 second because its timeline allowed it. That sequencing was correct. The margin on the second intercept, 19 seconds from release to kinetic event, with the seeker active and the notch maneuver having bought 1.8 seconds, was the smallest professional margin the pilot had ever worked within. The flight data recorder knew the exact numbers. The 1.8-second seeker break assessed against the 1.1 seconds of AIM-120D seeker acquisition after release. 0.7 seconds of margin in the terminal phase. Whether that was doctrine acceptable or doctrine requiring update was a question for the debrief room. Today, the answer was, it worked. At the intelligence debrief, conducted aboard USS Carl Vinson at 11:15 a.m., 3 findings framed the discussion. The J-16 crew's early seeker activation on the second PL-15 was a real-time tactical adaptation to the first intercept, assessed as high experience based on release geometry precision and protocol change speed. The AN/ASQ-239 jamming against the PL-15 active seeker had produced the 1.8-second track degradation during the notch. Whether jamming, notch geometry, or their combination was the primary factor remained undetermined and would require a dedicated test program. The 6-second APG 81 track loss during Hostile 1's intercept, caused by the atmospheric multipath layer over the strait, had not been flagged on the meteorological brief as an operational concern for radar performance at that altitude band. It would be flagged on every subsequent one. Every engagement is also an experiment. Both sides read the same data from the same 4 minutes. The PLAAF learned what an AIM-120D does to a PL-15 at terminal phase. US Aviation learned what a PL-15 active seeker does to AIM-120D intercept geometry at 44 nautical miles. Both sides will update their doctrine. Both sides will be ready differently next time. The Taiwan Strait at 10:30 a.m. was empty of military aircraft. The cloud deck below 15,000 feet was building slowly over the western coast, the afternoon thermals beginning to push cumulus tops toward 20,000 feet. Somewhere on the mainland, a J-16 crew was in a debrief room. Somewhere 69 nautical miles southeast of them, 9 crew members on a P-8A Poseidon were doing the same. 2 AIM-120D rounds, 2 neutralized inbound missiles. 9 crew members returned. 0 airspace yielded. 4 minutes and 17 seconds from catapult to final intercept. This was the first operational intercept of a PL-15 class munition by an AIM-120D. It will not be the last time either system is tested in this geometry. The next test will incorporate what was learned today. So will the response to it. At 40,000 feet, the strait was quiet. From the surface, looking up, there was nothing there. The radar tapes knew otherwise.